everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Tim and Tim Talk, event production, broadcast, heck, and even sometimes AV. And with me, Tim Kerbavaz. Tim, how are you?
Hey, Tim, it is great to be here back again for another episode.
It is great. We have a fun one to talk about. Tim, let's just jump right into this because this is Stop the Presses, something I thought, some words that would probably never come out of my mouth. Captioning not only made the news, they made headlines. Like we're talking New York Times, LA Times, like broadcast. It's everywhere, Tim. And we just so happen to have a resident expert on this show, and it's not me.
Tim, I've been known to know a thing or two about live captioning. It's definitely a passion of mine. It's something I've made a career out of, and we've got some excitement to have captioning in the news. It's so rare.
How do you feel to be like, now that we can sort of pontificate on this subject, and you are a resident expert, you're one of the top, like, EEG, it's not resellers, but users essentially for captioning. So, I mean, your credentials for this, you've been, talk a little bit about your credentials before we go into this and why we should listen to you on this subject.
Indeed, I've been waiting for this moment to be in the spotlight. Captioning has been a passion of mine for more than a decade, and it's been something that I've worked on professionally for a long time. And specifically, live captioning has been a really focus of my career and a focus of my business, right? We've worked together a lot on live captioning for events, and I've come in and helped you with projects with that. And I think
that's actually one of our early.
It was one of our earliest interactions. In fact, it was, one of your shows was the way that I really got started with this EEG product, the iCap ecosystem. And so I've worked for a long time in the captioning space. I've engineered broadcast systems and really built a business around helping clients design the engineering systems and the production decisions that have to go into, making live captions work on corporate events.
And I know you won't say this, so I will say it for you. One of the forefront, one of the resident experts in this field for technical, execution. I know you work with manufacturers to work on delivering product and updates. You give field reports back to them, and may I say they are impressive. The work that you give back and the feedback that you give to these companies. So because a lot of your work, it really grows. So enough about that, Tim. Let's go into it. Let's go Grammy night. We're dressed up. We're feeling good. We have a great show. Bad Bunny comes on the stage. Walk us through. Literally set the stage for what happened there, Tim.
So it's Grammy night. There's an opening performance from chart-topping artist Bad Bunny, and we're watching the telecast in English, right, in the U.S., and Bad Bunny comes out, and Bad Bunny performs in Spanish. He's a Puerto Rican artist, performs in Spanish, comes out on stage, and if you were watching the broadcast with captions on, you would see all the opening remarks, captioned, the VOG walk on. And then when Bad Bunny starts performing, the captions read singing in non-English. And then Bad Bunny, being a phenomenal artist, also won a Grammy that night. So congratulations to Bad Bunny. And then Bad Bunny gave a acceptance speech in Spanish, and the captions read speaking in non-English.
Okay, let's unpack that. First, Tim, we didn't win a Grammy that night, which we don't sing, which probably has something to do with it, but still, it wouldn't hurt to.
They have like audio Grammys, so we should get a podcast Grammy, right?
I think so. And listen, auto-tune works wonders with his voice. Without it,
absolutely.
Okay, sorry about that. I know I sidetracked. So singing in non-English, like you said, Bad Bunny. I believe I saw a stat. I'm unfortunately not his number one fan, but I saw his stat that said he's like the number one most downloaded Spotify account. So we knew that Bad Bunny was going to sing in Spanish. This is not an obscure artist, right? He's his music being number one, him singing in Spanish. So why couldn't they just say that leap of faith? I want to be devil's advocate here and say singing in Spanish, which 99.9% of us knew.
Right. So there's a couple things, and I think I need to get a little bit into the weeds here to explain maybe how this process worked. And one thing that I saw some discourse about was, this was an AI failure. And I want to clarify that it is unlikely that it was an AI failure, Tim. And so, the reasons for that is broadcasts of this caliber are almost always captioned by humans. And in most cases, they're captioned by humans using a technique called CART, which is, I have to look at my notes here, communication access real-time translation. I very rarely use that full phrase. It's stenography. It's
I don't
the
think
same
I've
technique.
ever heard the CART explained of like
I've
what
never-
that acronym stands for. Communication access real-time translation.
Right. It's
There
a
it
fancy
is.
way of saying stenography. It's the same technique that court reporters use on that sort of funny little, keyboard where they press the keys at once. And what stenography is, and I'll just back up here, is a phonetic language to write, to transcribe quickly English words or spoken words. And so, they press keys at the same time that represent the sounds in a word, and then a software translates that into English language. In a court reporter, they do this, and then they have time to correct it later. In captioning, they have to do it live. So they have to be an incredibly good stenographer to be a good captioner, because there is no backup plan. They press the button, it goes on to the television. So there is no going back to correct the record.
They are some of the most hardest working individuals. We've both hired captioners on our set. And I tell you, I mean, wizards back there of what they can do, how fast they type. It's literally unreal. If if you go to an event and it's being captioned live, sometimes you'll see it with the TV out there. Like, just take a peek. And these captioners are literally what they can do is superhuman.
You can see the focus in their face. They're like really, really nailing down, right? I mean, it's great. And so this is it's a phenomenal skill. But the challenge is there are not that many people who caption at all, right? Who do CART captioning at all. Most stenographers are court reporters, and the folks that specialize in captioning are far and few between. And the number of multilingual stenographers, is limited. And so captioners are trained when they caption, and when they hear a language they don't know, they are trained to write non-English or speaking in a language other than English, because, in this case, obviously we knew a lot about it, but imagine, a captioner is captioning an event where someone speaks a native Mayan language, or a native Mexican language, right? And so maybe there's some similarities phonetically to Spanish, or maybe they were speaking in, originally in Portuguese, and the captioner couldn't tell the difference, and they indicate they're speaking a language that is wrong, right? Now there's an uproar that it's the captioner's fault for making the wrong assumption, whereas they can tell, right? There's no question that it's non-English. And so I think...
So you're saying the captioner did what they should have done. This is by the rule book.
Right.
The captioner performed
yes.
as... let's just call it the Association of Captions. This doesn't exist. I don't know. Maybe it does.
Right.
But
there is a trade association, and this is what they're trained to do in this way, is to not identify the language, identify that it is not a language they know.
That would be, I wonder, this is the part where, let's say you speak Spanish, and it's Spanish, like maybe can you just put in Spanish, like, is there any wiggle room? And maybe you don't know the answer to this, and we should bring a captioner on next time.
Totally. A lot of this is discretionary. I think a lot of this is the captioner, protecting themselves from, liability of making a mistake. And so, if the information isn't provided to them directly, right, they're not going to make an assumption.
That totally makes sense. Okay, so the captioner did what they should have done, which is great. We also now believe that this is not AI because of essentially the level of production. And I completely agree with you. We have used, and I'm sure many of our event producers have used AI captioning, right? It's a thing, it exists, and it's not that good, because when it's off, it randomly will start talking about breakfast and eggs or something like that. Like, totally. You're not even close to what was being talked about. So it's very safe to assume that this is going to be this is human captions.
Very safe.
So,
very safe.
So with that, Tim, let's just hire a bilingual captioner. Problem solved. Easy, right?
Excuse me. Right. I mean, that seems like the obvious answer. The challenge here, Tim, is there are not a lot of bilingual captioners or multilingual captioners at all. In the US, most captioners don't also caption in Spanish. And even on the sort of handful of high caliber multilingual captioners who write in both English and Spanish, those are separate dictionaries. And I mentioned that this is a phonetic alphabet that is translated by software into English words. And so they've got a software with a dictionary. They've trained this software with the way that they write these phonetic words. There's the sounds could be similar, and words that have the similar sounds, they need to spell differently. So they have their own kind of signature way that they write these phonetic alphabet. And so if they're switching to writing in Spanish, they have to switch like the dictionary in their software. Like, okay, these are English words. Now I'm typing in Spanish words. And they basically have to stop writing in order to pick up the mouse and change the software setting and reset the software. And it's not an instant process. And so even if there was one person...
Oh, you literally are about to answer my question. So can't you just have one person dedicated to Spanish and one person dedicated to English?
Absolutely. And that's definitely, and the easier solution, right, is to have someone who's writing all the content in English, one person who's writing all the content in Spanish. And for that to switch between the captioners, when they start hearing Spanish, the Spanish captioner just presses a button, take over, they write, and then when it goes back to English. So that is, in my view...
So they have a mechanism in place to be able to fix...
Totally. That would be how I would design the system. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so are you hearing that, Grammy producers? Next year, give us a call, not just him, because I would like to also go to the Grammys. It'll be a fun night. So would you say then the fundamental breakdown, and how could this be managed differently? Is the only solution the two captioners?
I think that's the solution in this case, but I think ultimately it's a production breakdown and less of a technology breakdown. I think the challenge probably was that the people booking the captioning service and the people booking the performers and planning to run a show were maybe not communicating all the details. And I think that, typically in a broadcast sense, the engineering team or the sort of, the broadcast side is planning the captioning because that's part of the broadcast workflow. And the Grammys is a separate event, so they have their own production team. And there probably was communication, right? There was preparation materials. One of the things I want to highlight is captioners need preparation material, even in just one language, right? They need to know who's speaking and have the names correct and things like that. But it seems like...
And that's even more true when it becomes, when they use specialized jargon, right? When you go into the technical field, when you go into the medical field, and some of these terms and words, I will dare not say because I just won't even know how to pronounce them. They have to learn how to spell them instantaneously.
And so many of your events, Tim, have a ton of jargon. As much as our clients don't want to admit it, I know, working with you on events, your clients use a ton of jargon. And so with that, we want to give the captioners as much preparation as possible. We want to have a captioner who's an expert in the subject matter, has the words in their dictionary, like we said. But, the big thing I think that got broken down is somehow there wasn't adequate communication or a production decision about what the official correct response would be when someone speaks in non-English, right? And I think ultimately the captioner did what they were supposed to do in that situation. But I think the production team needed to, and certainly in the future needs to decide what is the best experience for the users of the captioner, the people who turned it on their TV or web stream. And I think that's ultimately a production decision.
And us not being in this room, I will say that, this is like a reoccurring theme, Tim. Whenever you and I are breaking down, how did these problems happen and what could be done in the future to prevent them? It's really sort of that seamless chain of communication. And it's always the production company over here, agency client way over here, and not all that information gets resolved before a production happened. Case in point, like you just said here, the production team is not necessarily thinking about caption. Dare I say that? Because the captioner is thinking about it. Totally. They're thinking of their words, but they're more worried about cameras and angles and lightings and the visual side of it. Totally. And I bet you the producers thought that this was a non-issue and probably didn't even think about it. It's like, we have captions. There's going to be no problem here.
Totally. And I think ultimately someone in the production, particularly for any problem, but particularly for accessibility, someone has to own the accessibility scope. Someone has to say, I am responsible for making good decisions about accessibility and helping everyone get those answers, right? And asking, hey, producer, what do you want on screen when this happens? Because this is what's currently going to be there, right? Is this what you want? And certainly you can make the argument that, you can choose whatever is a production, what you want that experience to be like. But,
Correct.
I think it has to be a concrete decision and an explicit decision and not just, we'll see what happens.
So Tim, you're close to this community. You are. This is something you pay attention to. Basically, I almost will say on a daily basis. Headlines, once they fade away, you're still actively involved in this. So you're a great person to answer this. Like, will anything change? Has the community updated their process or guidelines? Can they now say the specific language? Or is this all going to be? Are we all done talking about this?
I would say that given how many people are using captions, people who maybe are hard of hearing or deaf, people who are hearing and just want to have the captions on, I think captions have really become, an essential part of every production and not just an FCC requirement. And so I think given how many people are paying attention to the production, how many people are aware of the accessibility needs of a broad swath of communities who, need to be included in all of our productions. And given the ability to have these conversations more publicly on social media, I think that productions are paying more attention to accessibility. I think that certainly the Grammys will have a solution for this next year because they got called out, but I think that everyone in production is talking more about accessibility. And this is one of the reasons that I focus so much of my work on accessibility as a specialty, is because there's a lot of questions about it. People are saying, how do we do this better?
Yeah, absolutely. And, let's not let this moment become a fleeting moment and not used and not capitalized. So I'm glad that, there's really momentum now behind this to fix and improve. Because it sounds like all the tools exist to make this process better. One thing I will say with your comment, Tim, and one thing I will never understand is able-eared people like me that can hear and see using captions. If you put captions on in a movie, I am distracted. I am so distracted by captions. I have to have them off. How do you watch movies and TVs with the caption on? I'm just reading the whole thing. I'm one of the old school traditionalist guys that has to turn captions off.
I watch a lot of television with captions because I find it easier to understand, the
I don't
dialogue.
understand it at all.
Yeah,
I don't understand.
Yeah, totally. Well,
again, we're going to differ.
And absolutely, and that's why they're closed captions. We can turn them on and off as we each need, and that's the beauty, right?
And you're not alone on that. There are a fair amount of people that I know that watch with captions on, and it shocks me. Like, especially, I just see like the amazing production value, and instead of seeing that $1 million, special effects shot, I'll start reading, special effects, and my eyes will dart down. So, which is they're doing exactly what they're intended to do. And just, for those people that need it, I'm glad that it's there. But for folks like you and me, I'm surprised that you actually leave it on.
So I find it great, and particularly on web video on my phone where I'm distracted, I think it's great. So with that, Tim, I think we've beat this subject to death here, but I think, the takeaway is that I think, accessibility is got a bigger pedestal now. I think people are paying more attention to it. And I think that we're going to see more investment and more, active decision making about how to make all of our projects, whether that's broadcast or events, more accessible.
The only problem is, Tim, you actually didn't leave your phone number for the Grammy producer to call you for that. But hey, listen, how about they just reach us via email?
Great. We have our email here. We'll put it on screen. It's Tim's, TIMS, @timandtimtalk.com. You can also reach out to us on socials or leave a comment on YouTube, on LinkedIn, or reach out to us on after listening to the podcast.
This is an interactive show. We love your comments. We love your engagement here, and your feedback. If there's a topic, if there's something that's trending that you would like us to talk about, hey, feel free to reach out to us. If you have a comment, or if you would like to, join us in one of these as an expert on this subject matter, feel free to do that as well. So with that, my name is Tim Kay.
And I'm Tim Kerbavaz. And we talked.
We talked.
See you, Tim.